Why is this? What is this all about?
Well, I think that what it is, Tom, is that somewhere along the line, every person does not believe that there is a God. Every person is an atheist when they're born. They're born without religion, and religion is something which is laid on them as they grow up. And I think that everyone goes through the stage that I went through and that every atheist I know went through when they started to ask questions and found that the answers really weren't very satisfactory. They said, well, wait a second, here's a contradiction. I think if God created the world in 6 days, why are these scientists saying that the world wasn't created, it was formed over a period of millions of years, and these people seem to have their data, these people seem to have their facts? How can the religious people and the scientists be right? I think that people try praying and find it doesn't work, and then they say, well, why should I continue to follow this system of saying prayers since the prayers aren't efficacious? Why should I continue to go to church since all they seem to do is ask for money and they build huge buildings with it? And I think that at some point everybody comes to a position where they say, religion is all make-believe. I don't feel any God. I don't sense that there's any great spirit. I don't sense that the Bible is the only source of ethics. I don't sense that the Quran is a good ethical guide or whatever they use. And I think that for fear of being ostracized, they jump back into the belief system and they never really bother to explore their doubts or to find answers to their question. They just say, oh, well, everybody else around me seems to believe this, therefore I better shut up and go along with this, even though deep down inside I'm not really satisfied. And I think that atheists walking around personify these people's doubts and are living actual proof that the gods posited by religion are not real, since, we walk around, we don't get cast into lakes of fire unless some religious person decides to throw us into one. We don't have horns sticking out of our heads. We don't go around doing terrible things to people or ourselves. And, we are perfectly well-adjusted, normal, everyday people. And everything that people are taught that they need religion to accomplish seems to be accomplished by atheists who have none.
I would respond to that by saying that basically I'd take a position about 180 degrees opposite of that which of course obviously is to be expected in reference to the discussion that is at hand. I do not, of course, agree that a religious person is a person who has jumped back into a faith system that is simply a blind faith. My faith is not a blind faith. My faith is grounded in and rests upon solid historical fact and evidence, and I do study what I believe and what other people say about what I believe, and so I do not believe that, since I'm speaking as a Christian, the Christian faith is a blind faith that is something that just simply is a crutch for mankind. I believe that when a person will look at what the world has to offer, look at what materialism has to offer, look at what atheism has to offer, what is the meaning of myself, what is the meaning of my life, my relationships with other people, that they'll come to the conclusion that either this is a pretty dreary place or there's got to be something beyond what I've experienced so far. And when one looks at the world around him, when one looks at the complexity of the world, I believe it is very rational to look for something beyond myself. And there is something beyond myself. I do not, by doing that, say that I, in my humanity, am just simply a speck of dirt or something like that. But I realize that I have a higher being and a higher purpose than just simply an animal that's walking around the earth that might get squashed by a Phoenix Transit bus on the way home, and that's it. There's nothing more accomplished than that. And so I would take an opposite viewpoint at that.
See, this is what's so intrinsically sick about religion, is that it teaches people to hate life, to hate the world, and to hate experiences as it presents themselves, and to seek their solace and to seek some kind of state of mind salvation in a fantasy world that doesn't exist, that is totally made up and totally outside of reality, that has no relationship really to the world that people live in. And this is so sick, it's incredible. This is why I maintain that the only really effective way to deal with religion is to absolutely root it out of society altogether and just throw it into the rubbish can of history along with all the other bad ideas that have come up.
Well, notice, Tom, that I've heard you many times talking about the biasedness of religious people, the fact that we are unwilling to allow any other viewpoint to exist, and yet I think it has been very well demonstrated by Mr. Lynch, and I thank him for bringing it up, that the atheistic viewpoint goes, I believe, far beyond even the Christian viewpoint in reference to the fact that atheism cannot exist along with theism.
No, it's not that it can't exist along with theism. What I'm saying is that just as racism is a bad idea, just as sexism is a bad idea, just as the idea of slavery is a bad idea, and just as the idea that we shouldn't help the poor is a bad idea, there have been many ideas which have been pushed by the ruling classes in various societies which have been extremely harmful to the human race. And religion is certainly one of those ideas. And the problem with religion is that it works very subtly in our culture, attempting to seize each rising generation and indoctrinate it with the same irrational beliefs that have been around harming the human race for several thousand years. Most of the religious ideas found in Christianity actually have their origin 5,000 to 15,000 years ago, as far back as we can trace cultures. The idea of a Savior God, the idea of sacrifice, the idea that there's a spirit world, the idea that there is a life after death, all of these ideas are found extant in cultures from the Middle East, from India, especially in India. The idea that there are rites that people can indulge in, the idea that there are certain sacred or holy days, the idea that there are certain sacred or holy places, the idea that there are certain books which have to be read because they're sacred and inspired. These are all very, very primitive ideas that were invented and thought up when people were really just emerging from the ape stage in the period of human evolution.
Let me respond to that by saying the first section concerning the role of religion in society. What you just said is nearly a quotation, very, very close to the teachings of Hegel and Marx, and we see the result of that in the Soviet Union and other nations today. And then in reference to the fact that there are elements within Christianity that you would identify as having been borrowed from non-Christian sources, yes, there is in man the innate understanding, the innate need for a relationship with his Creator. That does not in any way invalidate God's revelation of Himself in Christianity. That obviously, I think there's a real logical flaw in attempting to say because other religious systems have certain elements in them, that any religious system that has those elements in them is therefore necessarily false. I don't think that logically follows from the argument.
Well, that's not quite what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that these ideas were thought up in a primitive age by the ruling elites in a society to control the population, to keep them at a subservient level, and to deliver them to future generations of a ruling class in a state of mind that would allow them to be controlled, governed, and told what to do, and to ensure that there would be a permanent kind of underclass in society. And I think we see this over and over and over again when we look at the teachings in religion, and especially the teachings in Judeo-Christianity. There's an awful lot of admonition to obey authority, to simply sit in church and listen to what a preacher tells you. You aren't taught in religion to think independently. You're not taught to go out and question things. You're not taught to challenge and investigate things. You're just taught to accept things on faith, which means accept things either without evidence or in spite of contrary evidence.
That's totally false in the fact that Christianity does not teach a person to not think. It does not teach a person not to examine one's faith and to represent it in that way as is simply to misrepresent the New Testament teaching concerning that. I have examined my faith. I am open to examination.